Welcome back to our news bulletin. The Pakistan Army says unprovoked Indian firing has killed a 20-year-old soldier in the Shahkot sector along the LOC. In a statement, the military's media wing said Pakistani troops effectively responded to the attack. It said Pakistani forces inflicted heavy losses on the enemy in terms of men and material. Pakistan has time and again asked India to respect a 2003 ceasefire agreement, but ceasefire violations by Indian forces continue unabated. Tensions between India and Pakistan increased after New Delhi stripped occupied Kashmir of its autonomy last August. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang says Pakistan and China should enhance cooperation to jointly fight existing challenges. Meeting Pakistan's President Arif Alvi in Beijing, he thanked Islamabad for its all-out support to China in testing times. President Alvi said both countries have shown the world that they believe in coexistence and non-interference. Alvi is in China on a two-day visit on the invitation of President Xi Jinping. During the president's visit, a number of MOUs are expected to be signed. Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi is also accompanying the president during the visit. The former Chief Minister of occupied Kashmir, Farooq Abdullah, has demanded all Kashmiris detained in other parts of India be brought back to the valley. The Indian government released the former Chief Minister after detaining him for 221 days. Talking to the media, Abdullah said all Kashmiri politicians should be released as soon as possible. He said the relatives of those detained across the occupied valley are facing difficulties in meeting their loved ones. Abdullah said families have to travel to different parts of India and stay inside the jail premises. After 5th of August, India arrested over 13,000 Kashmiris, including minors, politicians, and pro-freedom leaders. The occupied valley is under curfew for 226 days. Protests, including all-women sit-ins against the controversial Citizenship Amendment Act, continue across India. The Indian government has been facing nationwide demonstrations against the act, killing 83 people since 11th December. The all-women sit-in continues in the western state of Maharashtra's Mumbai Bagh and Bulletin districts. A similar demonstration in the capital New Delhi's Shaheen Bagh area also continues despite pressure from the government and police. The Delhi government has asked the demonstrators to end their sit-in amid the coronavirus threat, but women have refused. The protesters say they will end the sit-in only after the law's withdrawal. Meanwhile, India's ruling Bharatiya Janata Party has nominated former Chief Justice Ranjan Gogoi for Parliament's upper house. Gogoi was head of the bench which gave a controversial verdict of handing Babri Mosque's land to Hindus in Ayodhya case. Reacting to the development, Indian Supreme Court Bar called the decision disgusting and a clear reward in quid pro quo. The association said the decision has totally destroyed semblance of the judiciary's independence. Disgruntled BJP leader Yashwant Sinha said this decision will cause incalculable damage to the judiciary. Aam Aadmi Party leader Raghav Chadha said the move will set a bad precedent for independence of India's judiciary. Moving on, the US says it welcomes the Taliban statement condemning ISIS and committing to stop the militants' attempts to recruit, finance, or train in Afghanistan. This comes after the Taliban announced they have cleared Kunar province from ISIS fighters after extensive operations. US Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad said these actions show the Taliban's seriousness about fulfilling their commitments to the Doha deal. He said actions against Al-Qaeda and other groups that threaten the United States or its allies are part of the agreement. He said Washington's fulfillment of assurances depends on the group's commitment. Khalilzad called the Taliban's recent operations against ISIS terrorists in Kunar positive steps. Meanwhile, Kabul has rejected the prisoner exchange agreed on in the Doha deal before intra-Afghan talks. President Ashraf Ghani's administration says the detainees will be released only after the talks start and the Taliban stop attacking Afghan forces. As the coronavirus pandemic deepens, Iran has temporarily freed 85,000 prisoners, including political prisoners, in response to the coronavirus epidemic. The death toll from the coronavirus has reached 988, and a total of 16,169 people have been confirmed infected across the country. Speaking in Tehran, Iran's health ministry spokesman Kinear Jahanpour said they have also taken precautionary steps to prevent an outbreak in jails. The UN has warned that inmates have already been infected in Iran's overcrowded jails and called for all political prisoners to be released. Earlier, Pakistan said it is time for the US to end sanctions on Iran to help the country fight the global pandemic. Germany, France, and the UK have imposed a social shutdown as countries across the continent try to stem the spread of the coronavirus. In the past 24 hours, the World Health Organization has registered almost 14,000 confirmed cases and 862 deaths worldwide. Details in this report.
As the COVID-19 pandemic spirals out of control, the European Union has shut itself out to the world for 30 days. Germany has banned religious gatherings, while French President Emmanuel Macron has announced a 15-day lockdown. 100,000 police are being deployed across France to enforce the lockdown.
Violation of these rules is currently punishable by a fine of around 38 euros. It will be raised very quickly to a higher level, which could be 135 euros. Our aim is not to punish, but to call everyone to account.
Prime Minister Boris Johnson has shut down social life in the United Kingdom and ordered the most vulnerable to isolate for 12 weeks. The World Health Organization says the pandemic is the defining global health crisis of the time.
We advise countries to stick to testing, and from there, of course, all the steps that they need to do. And we advise countries to stick to containment strategy, because we believe that these epidemics, these pandemics, or this virus is controllable.
US actor Tom Hanks and his wife Rita Wilson have been released from the hospital in Australia after receiving treatment for coronavirus. Meanwhile, Prime Minister of Monaco, Sergei Tele, and Hollywood star Idris Elba have tested positive for COVID-19.
Moving on to Turkey, which says it has killed 2 Kurdistan Workers' Party militants in northern Syria. The Defense Ministry says the fighters were killed during Operation Euphrates Shield in the region. The ministry said it will not stop the operations against militants in the region. Yesterday, 3 PKK militants were also killed during Ankara's operations. Since 2016, Turkey has launched a trio of operations across its border into northern Syria. Ankara holds the fighter group responsible for the deaths of some 40,000 people in a 30-year terror campaign. In Syria, a civilian is killed and 4 others wounded by the explosion in the northeastern province of Al-Hasakha. State media says the explosion was caused by an IED that went off in Shaddadi city. It said one of the wounded civilians is in critical condition. State media said the target of the explosion is unknown, but that area is controlled by the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces. In October last year, Kurdish-led SDF and the government agreed to join forces to establish a border security zone. The UN says fighting in Tripoli and other areas of Libya continues to heavily impact civilians. In a briefing, the global body spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said around 749,000 people remain in areas impacted by fighting in and around Tripoli. Dujarric said almost 345,000 people live in frontline warring areas. He said heavy artillery shelling on the Al-Nawasi base heavily damaged the infrastructure of nearby residential areas. The spokesperson said the UN continues to call on all parties to abide by international humanitarian law to protect civilians. Meanwhile, Libya's daily oil production has dropped from more than 1.2 million barrels to less than 100,000 barrels. The state oil company said protests against the UN-backed government by tribal leaders in eastern Libya forced oil fields and ports to shut down. In Thailand, 18 people have been wounded after two bombs exploded in front of a government office in southern Yala province. Officials say 5 media persons and several security officials were among injured in the attack. They say the incident followed a meeting on the region's response to the coronavirus. There was no immediate claim of responsibility. Niger says its forces have killed 50 Boko Haram militants overnight clash in the southeastern Diffa region. In a statement, the Defense Ministry says 20 vehicles of heavily armed militants attacked a military post. The ministry said reinforcements from the Special Intervention Battalion joined the chase of militants to the shores of Lake Chad. It said several suspects along with 2 vehicles and many weapons were captured. The statement said a soldier was also wounded in the encounter. The UN says Boko Haram violence has displaced more than 110,000 people in the Diffa region of Niger. We have a lot more coming up right after this short break, so stay tuned. Welcome back. Iraq's President Barham Saleh has designated former Najaf Governor Adnan al-Zurfi as the country's new prime minister. State media said President Saleh tasked al-Zurfi to form a government within 30 days in a bid to end months of deadlock. Al-Zurfi is replacing Mohammad Tawfiq Alawi, who was appointed last month. The newly designated premier is a known U.S. ally. Al-Zurfi is a former official of the U.S.-run authorities that took over Iraq after the 2003 invasion. Iraq has been under political turmoil since last year as a series of demonstrations forced former Prime Minister Adil Abdul Mahdi to resign. Iraq says a pair of rockets has hit a base hosting U.S.-led coalition in Bezmaya near southern Baghdad. The Iraqi military did not report any casualties in the statement. It said Spanish forces linked to the coalition as well as NATO training forces are stationed at the base. Last night's attack was the third in a week, targeting installations hosting foreign forces. Since late October, there have been 24 rocket attacks on U.S. interests. No responsibility has been claimed, but Washington blames Iraq's Kataib Hezbollah for the attacks. Palestine says it has submitted its observations to the International Criminal Court on its right to the territories illegally occupied by Israel. The submission is in response to the ICC's request for determining the scope of its territorial jurisdiction in Palestinian areas. The Foreign Ministry says Palestine is the sole sovereign over the territories occupied in 1967. It says the territories are comprised of West Bank, East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. The UN court had launched a preliminary examination into the Palestinian situation after Jerusalem signed its founding treaty in 2015. Tensions in the conflicted zone remain high since US President Donald Trump revealed his Middle East peace plan last month. In Chile, a student who became famous after being blinded by police during anti-government protests has declared the country's beloved President Sebastián Piñera will never regain the trust of Chilean people. The visually impaired activist says the only way peace can be restored to the country now is if Piñera steps down. More in this report.
Since protests broke out in the country last year, demonstrators in Chile have been tormented by extreme police brutality. 31 people have been killed and 3,000 others wounded. Security forces have allegedly used brutal tactics including the firing of live rounds, arbitrary arrests, sexual abuse, as well as the firing of dreaded pellet guns which blind protesters. Gustavo Gatica, a student, was blinded after being shot with a pellet gun in the face.
I'm just one more person who, unfortunately, was shot in the face and I had to be in this situation. But I would like to continue being the person who is going to protest, who demonstrates. No, I don't pretend to be a leader or a representative of this movement.
He says these tactics won't stop Chile's protest movement.
While Pineda remains in office, the violence will continue. I believe his resignation would dial down the tension. I think that is fundamental.
Since last October, 445 Chileans have been rendered sightless by pellet guns. Chile isn't the only place in the world where pellet guns have failed to quell demonstrations and riots. India's ruling BJP has been using the same tactics in occupied Kashmir for years.
Belgian robotic software firm Zorabots will lead a fleet of video calling robots to elderly care homes. This will help residents stay in touch with relatives while they are isolated due to coronavirus precautions. This report has more.
Belgium's government has banned visitors from elderly care homes to curb the spread of COVID-19, which has infected 158 people in the country and has killed 10. Other measures include limiting shop opening times and closing schools. Zorabots plans to use robots to help ease social isolation amongst the elderly who are more vulnerable to coronavirus.
Our residents miss the contact with the outside world and their families. But of course, there is also a great concern among the family. How is my mummy doing now? How is my daddy doing now? The robot can help us a lot. On one hand, to keep that contact.
It will initially lend 60 James robots, a 1.2 meter tall butler-style bot that usually costs €2,500 to the homes. The robots are fitted with a simplified interface so a care home worker can program them to connect a video call through Facebook Messenger. The firm says it could lend up to 1,000 robots to care homes.
We have the software which is capable of telecommunicating from a distance. We have elders who are not able to communicate with the outside world. Why shouldn't we give our robots out there? We both know that the world is going to stop for a couple of weeks. The stock is going to sit here. We will not be able to sell, so why not use it in a good way?
As part of the scheme, telecoms firm Telling will give a free 4G router to care homes that don't have Wi-Fi.
As the economic fallout of COVID-19 chokes economies around the world, global markets are tanking, hitting historic lows every day. Governments, global monetary institutions, and fiscal authorities have pledged about $5 trillion to mitigate the economic impact of the pandemic so far. More in this report.
With $14 trillion disappearing from Wall Street alone, the world economy has been rattled by the new coronavirus pandemic, putting the global economic outlook in shambles. To cushion the seemingly pitiless fall, the US injected $3 trillion in stimulus, and the Federal Reserve slashed its interest rate twice this month, cutting it to nearly zero. But market and financial analysts warn government and central banks may not have the tools needed to contain economic shock that could last for months.
Central banks can't mitigate a demand shock. Typically what happens when interest rates get cut and quantitative easing gets rolled out is that it encourages banks to lend. Well, banks can only lend if there is a demand for lending. If there is no demand for lending because people are staying at home, not spending money, worried about losing their job.
European markets are reeling from one bloodbath after the other, while US benchmark Dow Jones and S&P 500 crashed past the horrific 1987 Black Monday record. Experts say stimulus injection can't hold the storm for too long.
Right now, buyers are completely absent. Algorithms and just general sellers have complete control. And so in a one-sided market that's very illiquid, you can push the market around any way you want short term, which is causing a lot of this obvious kind of concern for people. It bleeds into the money market activities.
The virus has devastated the global economy, which was already struggling to recover from the Brexit fiasco and the protracted trade war between the US and China.
Oil has slipped below $30 per barrel, plummeting over 11% on average. Globally coordinated crisis measures failed to ease rising fears over the economic fallout of coronavirus. Brent crude plunged to 12% at over $29.50 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude slipped over 9.5% to $28.50 per barrel. North American shale producers have announced they are cutting oil drilling activity and budgets. Brent's premium to WTI narrowed to less than $1, making U.S. crude oil uncompetitive in international markets. This was followed by President Donald Trump's announcement that the U.S. will fill its emergency crude reserves to help domestic energy producers. Leaders of the G7 major economies have pledged to take all necessary measures to safeguard the economy and help workers affected by the coronavirus pandemic. In a joint statement, the leaders said they will cooperate to ensure a strong global response and achieve strong growth in the G7 economies. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said to ease public fears over the pandemic, the bloc agreed to accelerate work towards developing drugs to treat COVID-19. The leaders called on global institutions like the International Monetary Fund to swiftly deploy financial assistance to countries that need it. Chaired by U.S. President Donald Trump, the meeting is believed to be the first ever G7 summit via a video conference. European markets have reverted from early gains with the fast-spreading coronavirus putting the continent in shutdown mode. The COVID-19 fears are fueling an impending recession in the European markets. The pan-European stock 600 slipped over 1% amid a choppy session after gaining 3% at the opening bell. Travel and leisure stocks plunged nearly 10% as shutdowns continue to hammer the sector. The indices of London's FTSE, Frankfurt DAX and Paris CAC 40 also traded lower. Now let's look at the weather from around the globe. This is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.